There's so many red flags. I don't know how you can have that many red flags for an ex-husband and him not be convicted of anything. Hello and welcome to Investigating Iowa. My name is Sarah. I am pumped to have you here this week because we are doing our mystery week for all the cases of our neighbors. There's going to be 5 cases. We've been filming Sunday through Wednesday and again on Friday. The reason we're skipping Thursday is because we are starting the Born and Raised series that will be also up on the platform. So definitely come back on Thursday for that, which by the time I post this will be tomorrow. If you also haven't been keeping up with the series, the yesterday's case and Friday's case are kind of linked. They're not exactly linked. I shouldn't say that because they are all done in a similar time period, in a similar place. Like they're all done in the Cedar Rapids area. So I do talk about how there's an article that the Cedar Rapids Gazette did in that time period that kind of said, oh, it's weird that these 3 women have gone missing, and weird enough too, they all have ex-husbands that they were recently filing for divorce with, and it's just a lot of weird things connecting these cases, and the Cedar Rapids Gazette pointed that out, but I don't think anything's really come of it. Today we are covering Lynn Schuller's case, and I really hope I'm saying that name right, but Lynn and her ex-husband had their difficulties, and this case file really goes through a lot with her ex-husband. They didn't really have any other suspects that they talked about, but there's some real fishiness in this one. There's so many red flags. I don't know how you can have that many red flags for an ex-husband and him not be convicted of anything, but we'll get into that. And even like the aftermath afterward, like after she had gone missing, like is so crazy too, like just to think like those still weren't red flags to police officers and authorities. Maybe they were, they just didn't have enough evidence to convict him of anything. Before we get too far into the case, I do want to just give my disclaimer that I don't mean any disrespect to any of the family members or the people that I'm talking about. This is all just information I'm finding through case files, through articles, videos, all that sort of stuff, and compiling into one video for you all to learn from and hear about the story from. I do want to say shout out to Iowa Cold Cases for helping me collect this information. And with that, we'll get started with Lynn's case. Lynn grew up in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and she and her family would often go up to kind of a lake home or like a vacation home in northern Minnesota during the summers and spend their time up there. And when she was 13 years old, she actually met Keith Schuller, and she was 13 and he was 19 years old, and there was a 6-year difference between the two, and they started a long-distance relationship. Now, I know, like, my opinion doesn't really matter in this all, but my grandparents were 6 years apart, and I don't find it as weird because they, like, met and started a relationship when they were in their 20s, but I think it's a little strange that Lynn and Keith had a relationship when she was 13 years old and when he was 19 years old. Anyway, my opinion doesn't matter. You are all here for the facts, so I'll get back to it. In 1965, the two got married and moved to Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and they actually had their firstborn child in 1969, and it was actually going to be their only child. But 2 years later, in 1971, Keith, out of the blue, just said he wanted a divorce, and he was very adamant about it. But Lynn said, you know, I want to work on this marriage. I want to work on this family together. We just had this baby together. I want to work on it for the sake of the baby. And that's even what she told her mom. She said, I want to keep on working on this marriage, and I don't want to get a divorce. So she didn't grant him the divorce. We haven't talked at all about Keith yet, and I just kind of want to give you a little background on him. He was in the Army as a medic for 3 years, and he had this super big passion for reptiles and for animals, and so he actually owned a 6-foot-long alligator named Pogo and 2 snakes that he just was very fond of, like loved these animals, and he had these animals with him for years. In 1972, Lynn had sent a letter to her mother saying that, you know, he was still being very adamant about wanting a divorce and he was still pushing it, and he actually threatened her life over it. And Lynn's mom thought this was insane. And she didn't believe that anything like this could ever happen to her family. So she actually threw the letter away, thinking that, it would never escalate to anything like that. A few months later, Lynn's family went up to that lake house or that vacation home that they had in northern Minnesota, and were just kind of enjoying their time, enjoying their vacation up there, when they got a call from Keith. And Keith had said, "Lynn is gone, and I have no clue where she is. I think she's missing." And their family immediately dropped what they were doing and drove down to Cedar Rapids. On August 6, 1972, we finally get the account of what happens on this day. And Keith claims that he woke up and that morning he took their 3-year-old child at 7:30 in the morning and they went out. Now, the articles I read didn't explain where they went, but they were gone for about 5 hours. And when they came back, Keith says that Lynn's bike was missing from the yard and Lynn was nowhere to be found. And he didn't really draw too much suspicion to this. He wasn't very off-put by this. So he actually took their son and took him to Beaver Park to go swimming, but the swim only lasted about an hour and they came back to the house relatively quickly. And so when they got back, they realized that Lynn's bike was there again, but Lynn was still gone, and all of her personal belongings, such as her keys and her wallet and all that, were still inside the house. They also noticed that the home wasn't disturbed at all. There was no signs of a break-in or anything stolen or anything. And this is when I guess Keith decided that he should call the police and call her parents and try and figure out what happened to his wife. About 24 hours after Keith had thought something kind of was wrong and he had called the parents, he actually called authorities. And authorities obtained a search warrant to come and search the Schuller home, and a ton of volunteers got together and started searching the local area to see if they could find her. But they were going through his home and they were obtaining all these different things, and they asked Keith to come with them to search the nearby woods to look for Lynn's body, but Keith refused to do it. And he actually was arrested for refusing to assist a police officer. And he explained later that the reason he refused was because he had already searched the woods and he didn't find anything there. And then they ended up letting the charges drop because they didn't have sufficient evidence against him to keep the charges going. So just to clarify, he was only arrested for refusing to assist an officer. He wasn't arrested for her murder or her disappearance or anything like that. So there was a lot of moving parts happening. They actually took a bunch of aerial photos of the region of their home, to see if any of the ground looked like it had been broken up or somebody had maybe buried a body nearby. And meanwhile, her parents had offered up a $1,000 reward to anybody who had any information that could lead them to either her body or her whereabouts. But there was kind of this ongoing suspicion, and I say suspicion very clearly, that possibly Keith had taken her and murdered her and chopped up her body and fed it to his alligator, Pogo, and the other snakes. But I just want to say that was just a suspicion. That was kind of a rumor that was going around. It was never confirmed or anything like that. So we come back to the fact that Keith wants a divorce, and this was no secret to the family. Obviously, Lynn had talked about it with the family, and Lynn had wanted to keep her marriage going. Well, after Lynn disappeared, Keith kept filing for divorce, and when her parents hired an attorney to represent their daughter, he would drop the case. Anytime it got close to the fact that he might have to testify to his wife's whereabouts or her disappearance, he would drop the case. And he actually filed for divorce 7 times within their county. And every single time he just kept dropping because he would have to testify. So without Lynn's parents knowing, Keith actually went to Dubuque County Court to file for divorce. So he could get it granted without them hiring an attorney or anybody to represent their daughter. And so he actually was granted the divorce in 1976. Keith actually had Lynn declared dead legally, and all of her life insurance money went to her child, but obviously the child wasn't old enough yet, and the other person it would be given to in the meantime would be her ex-husband. So it's not quite clear when Keith met his next wife, but it's known that he met her before Lynn had actually disappeared. He had met her before them, but he actually got married to her after Lynn had disappeared and all of this happened. They got married, and their marriage actually ended in divorce as well. This leads us to the aftermath of the case, and Keith decides he wants to go teach middle school science. So he actually moves to Idaho and goes to teach there, kind of in a smaller town. And it was recorded that he was there for 25 years. He was well respected in that community, well liked. And then there was a post in 2013 on Reddit, which for those who don't know, Reddit is kind of like an open forum where people talk. And the Reddit post was titled, "What's the scariest unsolved mystery you've ever heard?" And this student posts and says, "My former middle school science teacher," and goes on to explain that their science teacher, who happens to be Keith, was obsessed with death, like obsessed with deadly diseases, obsessed with deadly animals, and like everything to do with death. And he would talk about it a lot, and to a point where it was kind of questionable. This student also talked about how this teacher lived right next to the school, and that he would have his students come over after school and feed Pogo, his alligator. After leaving the school, he decided to become a coroner for the county, and that's kind of all we know about the case. I went through some of the forums that were online regarding this case, and it is a huge mixed bag of emotions. A lot of this was based on rumor, things that supposedly had happened, right? People were spreading this rumor that he had fed his ex-wife to this alligator, but that was like a spreaded rumor. I'm not sure exactly how to take away a lot of this, but I think there's a lot of legal documents that are set in stone that do show what was happening during the time. I also think there's numerous accounts of what was happening at the time as well to show the character of people involved in this case. But there was a lot of people very upset on the forum defending Keith, saying that they've always known him to be kind, they've always known him to be caring, he's done great things for the school district he worked for. One of the people even said that they met him when they were 12 and he helped them get their reptile badge for Boy Scouts or something. I honestly couldn't read all the comments because it was literal paragraphs of people just talking about this case, and there was like dozens and dozens of comments that were just paragraphs, and I just got so overwhelmed, and it was so many people just giving their opinion that at that point there was no real fact based in there. But I did think it was interesting that he had such an amazing reputation at this new school he taught at, and that people were so that he even got like a lifetime achievement award in this area that he was living in Idaho. Anyway, it doesn't matter what I have to say, because when it all comes down to it, Lynn's family still doesn't have answers. It didn't specify what members of her family are still with us, but I'm sure that they would love to have more answers than they do now. I will put up the Lynn County Sheriff's Office phone number for anybody who has information. So on Friday is our last day of Mystery Week, and then I kind of feel bad saying that because on Sunday I'm going to come out with another one, because Sunday is our Cases of Our Neighbors regular scheduled program. So come back on Friday and get the last kind of piece of the puzzle of these three cases that kind of aligned at the same time. And with that, I ask you to be respectful in the comment section as always, and yeah, thanks for joining us.